My wife handed me divorce papers on stage in front of 200 people and smiled while doing it. Then she called our marriage the first contract of her new law firm. The strange thing is, for about 3 full seconds, I honestly thought she was joking. That's the part I still feel stupid about. I was standing near the catering table holding a tray of stuffed mushrooms from Wegmans, while people from downtown Lancaster clapped and laughed like they were watching some clever little performance at a country club fundraiser. Meanwhile, my knees were killing me. I'd spent half the afternoon unloading folding chairs from my truck in the rain because Marianne said hiring movers was a waste of money at this stage. So there I was at 58 years old, sweating through a blue button-down shirt, while judges and real estate developers drank champagne in the office I helped pay for. Funny how life works. The office sat on North Queen Street in one of those old brick buildings developers love turning into luxury professional spaces, exposed beams, hanging Edison bulbs, fake industrial charm. Marianne had been obsessed with the place ever since she signed the lease. Correction. Ever since we signed it. Though somewhere along the line we quietly disappeared from her vocabulary. By 7:30 the place was packed. Lawyers, bankers, insurance people, 2 county judges. Even Pastor Green and his wife from church showed up carrying a bottle of wine neither of them could afford. I remember thinking Marianne looked beautiful that night. Not warm, not happy, just polished. Cream-colored suit, diamond earrings, hair pulled back neat enough to survive a wind tunnel. She looked like one of those women on cable news who smile while talking about layoffs. I should have known then. Derek Vance stood beside her most of the night. 39 years old, perfect teeth, navy suit too tight around the arms because younger men think every shirt should look vacuum sealed onto their bodies. Every time Marianne laughed, Derek leaned in half a second too quickly. You notice those things after 30 years of marriage, even when you don't want to. Around 8 o'clock, Marianne tapped a fork against a champagne glass. Everybody turned toward the stage area near the reception desk. "Can I borrow my husband for a moment?" she said. People smiled. I actually felt proud walking up there. That's the embarrassing part. I thought she was finally going to acknowledge what it took to get her there. The late nights. The overtime. The second mortgage after she failed the bar exam the first time. The years I ate microwave dinners alone while she studied upstairs, surrounded by legal pads and coffee cups. Hell, I used to rub her feet at 2 in the morning when she cried and said she was too old to start over. I believed in her harder than she believed in herself. That's what made the next 60 seconds feel like getting hit by a truck. Marianne took the microphone and smiled out at the crowd. "I want to thank everybody for supporting Marianne Callahan and Associates," she said. "Every successful law firm needs its first contract." A few people chuckled politely. Then she turned toward me. "And tonight," she said, "that first contract will be my divorce." The room exploded with laughter. Not everybody laughed. Some people froze immediately. Pastor Green looked like somebody punched him in the chest. But enough people laughed. Enough people clapped. And Derek nearly dislocated both shoulders applauding. Marianne reached behind the podium and pulled out a large manila envelope. She handed it to me with both hands like she was presenting an award. "Frank," she said softly into the microphone, "I think this is best for both of us." My fingertips went cold. I opened the envelope halfway and saw legal paperwork. Real paperwork. County filing stamp already on the front page. Somewhere behind me, glasses clinked together. Some woman whispered, "Oh my God." A photographer from the Lancaster Eagle-Gazette lifted his camera. I could actually hear the shutter clicking. Marianne leaned toward me then. Her smile never moved, but her voice dropped low enough only I could hear. "Please don't embarrass yourself tonight." I don't know why that hurt more than the divorce itself. Maybe because of the tone. Like I was already something messy she needed cleaned up before the important guests arrived. For a second, I honestly couldn't breathe right. I looked out into the crowd and saw people avoiding eye contact. That part felt worse than the laughter. Americans over 50 know that look. That uncomfortable little social panic people get when somebody's marriage dies in public. Nobody knows where to put their hands. Or their eyes. I looked down at the papers again, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. That's when I noticed something strange. The packet felt thinner than the version I'd already seen. My stomach tightened. I flipped carefully through the pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then 8. No page 7. And suddenly the room sounded very far away. Because 3 weeks earlier, Marianne had accidentally or maybe intentionally left her laptop open on the kitchen island while she rushed out to meet Derek downtown. I'd found the original draft that night, including page 7. The page she absolutely did not want read out loud in front of judges, clients, reporters, and half the professional class of Lancaster County. I looked up slowly. Marianne's smile stayed perfectly in place, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Concern. Tiny. But there. The crowd waited for me to say something. Anything. My hands stopped shaking. That surprised me. Maybe because humiliation has a strange way of burning fear right out of you. I took one step toward the microphone. Before I signed anything, I said calmly, "Why don't you read page 7 out loud?" The room went completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. Even the bartender stopped pouring drinks. Marianne's face didn't collapse dramatically like in the movies. It was smaller than that, more real. Her smile simply froze, like her body forgot what expression came next. And standing beside her, Derek suddenly looked a whole lot less comfortable in that expensive suit. People think marriages fall apart with screaming. That's television. Real marriages usually die quietly. One small change at a time, passwords, silences, separate grocery lists taped to the fridge like roommate instructions. Looking back now, I can tell you exactly when things started changing with Marianne. It was the summer after she passed the Pennsylvania bar exam. She was 47 years old, and I was proud enough to tell strangers at gas stations. My wife's a lawyer, I'd say, while pumping regular unleaded into my truck. Every single time Marianne would smile politely, at least in the beginning. We lived in a ranch house outside Lancaster near Millersville Pike. Nothing fancy. Brown shutters, small back deck. Wind chimes Marianne bought 20 years earlier at some craft fair in Intercourse, Pennsylvania. That house used to feel like safety. I thought we'd grow old there. By then, I'd already retired from the insurance investigation company after 30 years chasing fraud claims across central Pennsylvania. Car fires, fake injuries, contractors billing for roofs that never existed. You spend enough years investigating lies, you start noticing tiny things other people miss. The problem is, you never expect to use those instincts on your own wife. At first, the changes in Marianne were small enough to explain away. She started dressing differently. Not younger exactly, sharper. Then came the new phrases. My professional image. My networking circle. My visibility. Everything became branding. Even dinner. We used to eat breakfast at Cracker Barrel after church most Sundays. Then one morning she looked around the restaurant and quietly said, "We really should start going somewhere nicer." That sentence sat with me a long time. Not because of the restaurant. Because of the word we. It sounded forced. Like she was trying to drag me into a life she'd already decided I didn't belong in. A few weeks later, she invited me to dinner with some lawyers from her new firm. That was the first time I met Derek outside the office. We ate at a rooftop place downtown where every appetizer looked like it needed its own instruction manual. At one point, somebody asked Marianne what kind of law she wanted to focus on. Without missing a beat, she smiled and said, "Well, I married an insurance investigator, so technically I've spent 30 years around contracts and fraud." Everybody laughed. Then she added, "Frank still thinks discovery means finding the TV remote." The whole table cracked up. I laughed too. That's what men my age do sometimes. We laugh because admitting something hurts would somehow feel worse. But driving home that night in silence, I noticed she never reached for my hand once. Not once. Our daughter Kelly noticed the changes before I did. Or maybe before I admitted them. Kelly was 34, divorced, lived in York, and had inherited every ounce of Marianne's intelligence without the cruelty that came later. One afternoon, she came by the house while Marianne was at work. We sat on the back deck drinking coffee from old Lancaster Barnstormers mugs. Kelly watched me clean the grill for a while before finally saying, "Dad, she talks about you differently now." I kept scrubbing. What's that supposed to mean? She talks like you're in the way. That irritated me, mostly because I already feared it might be true. "She's under pressure," I said. Kelly nodded slowly. "Okay, but pressure usually reveals people. It doesn't invent them." That one stayed with me. About 2 months before the grand opening, Marianne started spending more nights networking. Derek's name came up constantly. Derek thinks this. Derek says we should do that. Derek knows a developer downtown. Funny thing about middle-aged affairs. People think they hide them well because they aren't sneaking around like teenagers. But emotional affairs leak into everything. Tone, energy, timing. One Tuesday night, Marianne rushed out around 7:30 wearing heels too expensive for casual client drinks. She barely touched the meatloaf I'd made. I might be late, she said while grabbing her purse. Then she stopped near the kitchen island. Can you plug my laptop in if the battery gets low? Sure. That was it. Simple. Normal. At least it sounded normal then. Around 9 o'clock, I walked into the kitchen and noticed her laptop screen glowing beside the PPL electric bill. The battery warning blinked red. I remember the exact stupid detail that changed my life. An empty yogurt cup sitting beside the mouse pad. That's the kind of thing memory does after betrayal. It preserves useless details forever. I reached over to connect the charger. That's when I saw the document open on the screen. Divorce_draft_final_VT3.docx. At first, I honestly assumed she was working on a client file. Then I saw my name. My chest tightened so fast it felt physical. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The document was already open halfway through. Page after page of legal language about asset division, pension distribution, property transfer. Then I reached page 7. That page changed everything. The wording looked cold enough to belong in a hospital form. It stated I had shown signs of mild cognitive decline and financial confusion over the previous year. According to the document, Marianne should temporarily control marital assets during the divorce process, including ownership rights connected to the law office building. In exchange, I would receive $1. $1. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because of the money, because of my father. 10 years earlier, after Dad died, I used part of his life insurance payout to help Marianne secure the building through a small LLC under both our names. She knew exactly where that money came from. She also knew what that building meant to me. My father spent 40 years laying concrete in Lancaster County until arthritis twisted both his hands sideways. That insurance money represented his entire life. And now my wife wanted to erase me from it with legal paperwork. I leaned back in the kitchen chair and suddenly noticed how quiet the house sounded. No television, no footsteps upstairs, just the refrigerator humming. I remember opening the browser afterward and typing, "Gray divorce financial abuse." That search led me down a rabbit hole I wish I'd never seen. Stories about older spouses being manipulated, isolated, pressured into signing things they didn't fully understand. One article hit me especially hard. Many victims hesitate to fight back because they feel ashamed they missed the warning signs. Ashamed. That was exactly it. Not angry yet. Ashamed. Around midnight, I drove to a Turkey Hill gas station outside town and sat in my truck listening to old Alan Jackson songs with the engine running. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. At 58 years old, I suddenly felt ancient. Replaceable. Like a piece of furniture somebody already planned to haul out to the curb. I stayed there almost an hour before finally whispering something out loud to myself. I'm not going to ruin her. Then after a long silence, I added, but I'm sure as hell not going to help her ruin me. The next morning, I called Walt Berman. If you've ever lived around Lancaster long enough, you know there's always one old attorney everybody trusts more than the fancy downtown firms. Walt was that guy. He'd been a prosecutor back in the 80s before opening a tiny practice above a hardware store in Lidditz. Divorces, DU is, property disputes, nothing glamorous. Walt still used a flip phone, which honestly made me trust him more. When I walked into his office carrying a leather folder and looking like I hadn't slept in 3 days, he took one look at me and said, "Well, either you killed somebody or Marianne finally lost her damn mind." I almost laughed. Almost. His office smelled like old paper-burnt coffee and peppermint gum. A little window unit rattled in the corner, trying its best against August heat. Walt sat behind his desk wearing reading glasses held together by tape. I handed him the documents without saying much. He started flipping pages while eating powdered donuts from a Dunkin' bag. That's the thing about older men. Sometimes the less dramatic they act, the worse the situation actually is. For about 2 straight minutes, Walt didn't say a word. Just flipped pages. Chewed. Adjusted glasses. Then he reached page 7. His eyebrows climbed halfway up his forehead. He read it once. Then again slower. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Frank. I waited. This isn't just dirty, he said. It's stupid. And stupid always leaves DNA. That was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. Not because anything was funny. Because hearing another human being confirm I wasn't crazy felt like oxygen. Walt pointed at the cognitive decline language. She can't casually slip this into a property transfer unless she planned to pressure you into signing fast. She thinks I'll fold, I said quietly. No, Walt replied. She thinks you're embarrassed enough to disappear. That one hit hard because it was true. People my age are raised different. You keep private pain private. You don't make scenes. You don't air family business in public. Marianne knew that. She was counting on it. Walt rubbed his chin for a second. You still got proof about the building ownership. Somewhere. Well, he said, while standing up carefully, guess we're going treasure hunting. The next 2 weeks felt like digging through the bones of my own marriage. Every box in the basement held another version of our life together. Tax returns, mortgage papers, old Christmas cards, a receipt from the first couch we bought after getting married in 1996. You ever notice how paperwork outlives feelings? One afternoon, I found the LLC paperwork inside an old file cabinet behind our furnace. Marianne's signature sat right beside mine. Another day, I spent 3 hours recovering access to an ancient Gmail account because I remembered Marianne once emailed me. Couldn't have bought this building without you. Turns out she forgot to delete that. People get sloppy once they think they've already won. Meanwhile, Marianne acted like nothing was wrong. Actually, scratch that. She acted better than normal. That part scared me more. She started being weirdly polite. Too controlled. Like somebody managing a patient before surgery. One night she brought home takeout from Olive Garden and asked if I wanted extra breadsticks. That woman hadn't voluntarily brought me breadsticks in 10 years. The next morning, our joint credit card stopped working at Sheetz while I was buying gas. I found out she'd canceled it. No warning. No conversation. Just declined. I stood there at the counter while some teenage cashier awkwardly avoided eye contact. Humiliation comes in tiny moments too, not just big ones. A few days later, my truck disappeared from the driveway. Turns out Marianne had reported it as an abandoned vehicle through a parking enforcement contact downtown. I spent 4 hours and $312 getting my own truck back from a tow yard outside Columbia. When I got home, Marianne sat at the kitchen island typing on her laptop. Didn't even look up. I stood there holding the tow receipt. You had my truck towed. Calm as weather, she said. You haven't been emotionally stable lately, Frank. I didn't know if you were planning to leave it there indefinitely. That sentence chilled me. Not because it was cruel, because it sounded rehearsed. Everything with her sounded rehearsed now. That night, I sat outside Dunkin' Donuts using their free Wi-Fi because Marianne had changed the house password. Picture that for a second. 58-year-old retired investigator sitting in a truck at 11:30 at night, organizing evidence against his own wife, while teenagers inside filmed TikToks drinking frozen coffee. If somebody had told me 5 years earlier that would become my life, I'd have laughed in their face. Around midnight, Kelly climbed into the passenger seat holding 2 coffees. Apparently, I'd forgotten she could still track my location through the old family iPhone plan. She handed me 1 coffee and looked at the folders spread across the dashboard. You okay? Nope. Fair. For a while, we just sat there listening to rain hit the windshield. Then she picked up Derek's printed text messages. One in particular. Old men sign anything if you embarrass them enough. Kelly stared at it silently before whispering. That smug little bastard? I nodded. What surprised me most wasn't the insult. It was how small they'd made me in their minds. Not a husband. Not a partner. Not even an obstacle. Just an aging man they assumed would fold quietly to avoid embarrassment. Kelly finally looked over at me. So what are you going to do? I honestly didn't know. Part of me still loved Marianne. That's the ugly truth nobody likes talking about in stories like this. Love doesn't disappear the instant somebody betrays you. Sometimes it hangs around way past dignity. That's what makes leaving so hard. The next day, Walt connected me with a private investigator he trusted named Ron Mercer. Cost me $850 up front. Ron looked like every retired Pennsylvania state trooper ever created. Gray mustache, thick neck, wore white New Balance sneakers with jeans. 3 days later, he handed me a folder containing phone record screenshots and a recovered voicemail Marianne had deleted from a synced cloud account. I played the voicemail twice in my truck. Marianne's voice came through crystal clear. Once Frank signs, the building's finally clean. Then Derek laughed. Not nervous laughter either. Cocky laughter. Like I was already gone. I shut the recording off halfway through and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. 30 years investigating fraud taught me something simple. The moment people stop seeing you as human, they become reckless. That's exactly what happened to Marianne and Derek. They got arrogant, and arrogance makes people careless. The night before the grand opening, I stood alone in our garage holding a flash drive in one hand and the original Page 7 in the other. Inside the house, Marianne practiced her speech upstairs. I could hear her heels moving across hardwood floors. Steady, confident, like victory was already waiting for her downtown. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket and looked around the garage one last time. Fishing poles. Old tools. My father's workbench. 30 years of marriage packed into shelves and dust. Then I said quietly to nobody at all, "All right, Marianne, if you want a show, let's give them one." The silence after I asked Marianne to read Page 7 lasted maybe 3 seconds. Felt like 30 years. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Even the jazz music coming through the ceiling speakers suddenly sounded too loud. Marianne stood there holding the microphone with that frozen smile lawyers use right before they object to something. Beside her, Derek shifted his weight for the first time all night. Tiny movement, but I noticed. That's the thing about spending decades investigating fraud claims. You learn people leak panic through little details first. A twitch. A swallow. A glance toward the exit. Marianne recovered faster than Derek did. Of course she did. She let out a soft laugh and tilted her head like I was some confused old man having a difficult moment. "Frank," she said gently into the microphone, "this really isn't the time." A few nervous chuckles scattered through the room. Not many. People were starting to realize this wasn't entertainment anymore. I looked out across the crowd. Pastor Green stood near the back, gripping his wine glass with both hands. One of the county judges had stopped smiling entirely. Even the bartender looked uncomfortable. Derek finally stepped forward. "Sir," he said, trying hard to sound calm, "this is a private matter." I turned toward him slowly. "You made it public the second you helped write Page 7, Derek." That landed. You could feel it move through the room. Not loudly. More like cold air slipping under a door. Derek's jaw tightened. Marianne quickly jumped back in. "Frank's upset," she told the crowd. "Obviously emotions are high right now. Read it." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Read Page 7. For the first time all night, Marianne looked directly afraid. Not terrified. Just uncertain. And uncertainty looked strange on her. She'd spent months building this version of herself. Controlled. Brilliant. Untouchable. Now I could see cracks forming underneath it. She lowered the microphone slightly. "Frank," she whispered, "please." That word almost got me. Seriously. For one dangerous second, I nearly folded right there. Because memory is a powerful thing. I still remembered the old Marianne. The woman who danced barefoot in our kitchen while meatloaf burned in the oven. The woman who cried into my chest after failing the bar exam the first time. The woman who once told me, "You're the only person who never made me feel stupid." That version of her still existed somewhere inside me, which made this whole thing hurt even worse. But then I remembered sitting in my truck outside Dunkin' Donuts using free Wi-Fi because my own wife changed the house password like I was some stranger renting a room. I remembered Derek's text. "Old men sign anything if you embarrass them enough." Something inside me hardened after that. Not hatred, just clarity. I stepped toward the podium and pulled my copy of the paperwork from the leather folder. "You gave me an incomplete version tonight," I said calmly. "Probably because the missing page says I'm mentally declining and should surrender ownership rights to the building for $1. A low murmur rolled through the room. Somebody actually said, "Jesus." Marianne immediately grabbed the mic again. "That's not what it says." Then read it. She didn't. Because we both knew I was telling the truth. The county judge near the front slowly removed his glasses and folded them in his hand. That image stayed with me afterward. Older people recognize dishonesty fast. We've lived too long not to. Marianne's voice sharpened slightly. This was drafted during preliminary discussions. It wasn't finalized. Funny, I said, because it already had filing stamps. That hit harder. People started looking at each other now. Not dramatically, just enough. The mood inside the room shifted from awkward to dangerous. Then Derek made a mistake. He stepped closer and said, "Frank, you're confused." That one sentence changed the entire night. Because suddenly the cognitive decline language didn't feel theoretical anymore. It felt coordinated. Walt later told me that was the moment the room turned against them. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the flash drive. Marianne saw it immediately. Color drained from her face. "Frank," she whispered. I walked over to the sound system beside the reception desk. A young employee started to object, then apparently thought better of it. Smart kid. I plugged the flash drive in. For 1 second, all you could hear was speaker static. Then Marianne's voice filled the room. Clear as church bells. Once Frank signs, the building's finally clean. Dead silence. No movement. No whispers. Nothing. Then Derek laughed through the speakers. That smug little laugh. And his voice followed. Old men sign anything if you embarrass them enough. Somewhere near the bar, a woman gasped quietly. Derek went pale so fast it honestly looked painful. Marianne stepped toward me in panic. Turn that off. I didn't. Another recording played. Marianne again. Lower voice this time. Tired. Annoyed. He won't fight back publicly. He cares too much what people think. That one cut deeper than everything else. Because she was right. Or at least she used to be. A church friend named Bill Turner shook his head slowly, grabbed his coat and walked out without saying a word. That hurt Marianne more than the recordings. Bill had known us 20 years. The room felt smaller now. Hotter. People avoided looking directly at Marianne. Funny how quickly admiration disappears once dignity enters the conversation. Then came the moment nobody expected. Kelly walked in through the front doors. And behind her came Angela, Derek's wife. Now I didn't know Kelly invited her until afterward. Honestly, it was probably smarter that way. Angela marched straight across the office floor in high heels sharp enough to break concrete. Derek saw her coming and visibly panicked. Angela, this isn't. She grabbed the champagne glass out of his hand, poured it directly onto his expensive brown loafers and said, "Car's in my name. Hope you enjoy the walk home." Half the room looked horrified. The other half looked like Christmas came early. Angela turned around and walked right back out. Didn't yell. Didn't cry. Didn't make a scene. That woman deserved a standing ovation. Instead, the room stayed silent. And somehow that silence felt even heavier. Marianne finally looked at me differently then. Not angry. Not superior. Just desperate. You were supposed to love me enough to let me have this. I stared at her for a long moment. At the office. At the crowd. At the woman I once would have done absolutely anything for. Then I answered quietly, I loved you enough to help build this dream, Marianne. I just don't hate myself enough to let you steal it from me. Her eyes watered instantly. Not dramatically. Just enough to ruin the perfect image she'd spent all night protecting. And suddenly she looked human again. Small. Tired. Lost. I gathered my paperwork slowly. No victory speech. No screaming. No dramatic exit. I simply nodded once toward Walt near the back wall. Then I walked toward the front doors. Nobody clapped this time. Nobody said a word. But as I stepped outside into the cool October rain, I realized something strange. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe again. People think revenge feels loud. It doesn't. Most of the time, it feels strangely quiet. 3 days after Marianne's grand opening disaster, I woke up alone in a furnished apartment off Millersville Pike with a stiff neck and a frozen Salisbury steak sitting in my freezer beside half a bag of peas. That was my big victory morning. Rain tapped against the window while some local meteorologist on WGAL warned everybody about early frost coming through Lancaster County. I remember standing there barefoot in gym shorts thinking, well, Frank, you sure showed them. Funny thing is, I didn't feel triumphant. Relieved, maybe. Lighter, but not happy. That's the part younger people don't understand about revenge. It doesn't magically rebuild the life that got broken. It just stops the bleeding. The divorce dragged on another 14 months. 14. Turns out humiliating your husband publicly while trying to pressure him into signing questionable legal documents creates complications. Who knew? Marianne hired another attorney from Harrisburg after Walt threatened to drag every recording and document into open court if necessary. The Pennsylvania Bar Association opened an ethics review after somebody anonymously mailed copies of page 7 to them. To this day, Marianne probably thinks I did it. I didn't. Walt did. Said it was community service. Derek disappeared within 2 months. Last I heard, he took a compliance job somewhere in Ohio after his marriage collapsed. Apparently, Angela kept the Audi. Good for her. Marianne's law firm survived technically, but something changed after that night. Lancaster's the kind of town where reputations travel faster than snowstorms. People still smiled politely at Marianne in public. But trust got thin. 2 major clients quietly pulled their contracts. A local developer stopped returning her calls. The newspaper article covering the grand opening never ran. Instead, the Lancaster Eagle-Gazette published a tiny little piece buried halfway down page 3 about a domestic dispute interrupting a business opening. That probably irritated Marianne more than anything else. She always wanted significance. And in the end, the whole thing got reduced to 6 disappointing paragraphs beside a mattress sale advertisement. Life has a sense of humor sometimes. Meanwhile, I spent most evenings alone in that apartment eating microwave dinners off paper plates because unpacking real dishes somehow felt too permanent. One night I sat watching a Steelers game I barely cared about, while a frozen meal rotated slowly behind the microwave door. Beep, beep, beep. That sound hit harder than I expected. Because silence in your late 50s feels different than silence in your 20s. When you're young, loneliness still feels temporary. At my age, empty rooms start asking dangerous questions. I found myself missing stupid things. The sound of Marianne blow-drying her hair upstairs. Her reading glasses left beside the sink. The way she always stole fries off my plate even after insisting she wasn't hungry. People are complicated that way. You can miss somebody and still know they hurt you. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months after the grand opening, I drove past the law office downtown. I hadn't planned to. Just happened. The sign still hung outside. Marianne Callahan and Associates. But only one office light glowed inside. I sat across the street at a red light, watching rain crawl down my windshield while memories piled into the truck beside me. 30 years. You can't bury 30 years overnight. I finally cried then. Not dramatic crying. No sobbing. Just quiet tears running down a tired man's face while windshield wipers squeaked back and forth. Because I realized something sitting there. I wasn't mourning Marianne anymore. I was mourning the future I thought we'd have. That's what divorce after 50 really steals from you. Not just the person. The imagined ending. Eventually the settlement finished. I lost the ranch house. That hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. But I kept my ownership share from the building investment part of my pension and enough savings to start over without depending on anybody. Walt told me that counted as a win. Maybe he was right. Maybe survival is the older version of winning. Around that same time, Kelly gave me an idea that changed everything. You know how many older people get manipulated financially, she asked one afternoon over breakfast at a diner near Route 30. You spent your whole career spotting scams. Turns out she was onto something. 3 months later, I opened a tiny consulting office called Callahan Senior Protection Consulting, named after my father. Just seeing his name on the glass door steadied something inside me. I started helping older folks review suspicious contracts, avoid shady home repair scams, and recognize financial manipulation from family members. Nothing glamorous, but meaningful. One of my first clients was a 72-year-old widow whose nephew tried slipping property transfer documents into hospice paperwork. 3 years earlier, I probably would have missed how much that mattered. Now I saw everything differently. Pain sharpens your vision if you survive it correctly. The last time I saw Marianne was outside the Lancaster County Courthouse, nearly 2 years after the grand opening. Cold morning, gray sky. She stood beside her Lexus wearing a long black coat and looked older than I remembered. Not ruined, just tired. Life had finally started touching her back. For a minute, neither of us said anything. Cars hissed through wet streets nearby. Finally, she looked at me and asked quietly, "How much pain did you want me to feel?" I thought about that honestly before answering. Because revenge has a dangerous way of changing shape in your memory. At first, you think you want justice, then humiliation, then punishment. If you're not careful, eventually you just want the other person to hurt as much as you did. And that road never ends well. So I told her the truth. "I didn't want you hurt, Marianne." "Then why did you do it?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Because you stopped seeing me as a person before any of this started." She stared down at the pavement. A cold wind moved between us. Then she asked the question I think both of us already knew the answer to. "Did you ever stop loving me?" That one sat heavy. Because the honest answer wasn't clean. "No," I said finally. "I just finally started loving myself too." Her eyes filled slightly, but she nodded like somebody hearing a verdict they already expected. Then I got in my truck and drove away. No dramatic ending. No triumphant music. Just an older man heading home through Lancaster traffic with coffee cooling in the cup holder and enough peace to finally sleep again. If there's anything worth taking from my story, maybe it's this. Getting older doesn't mean your dignity matters less. If anything, it matters more. And sometimes the hardest thing a good man ever learns is that protecting yourself is not the same thing as becoming cruel. If somebody ever mistook your kindness for weakness, you probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. And if this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where it hit home. Sometimes the people who seem strongest are carrying the quietest heartbreak.